I'm Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, and this is Rendering Unconscious. My guest today is Sarah Tomley, co-founder of the Who the Hell Is series of books with Alice Bowden, a wonderful series of books exploring the life, times, and ideas of the world's greatest thinkers. She originally studied philosophy at university before working in book publishing for more than 20 years. As editor and commissioning editor for some of the UK's most prestigious publishing houses, Sarah has commissioned many best-selling reference books, including The Philosophy Book and the award-winning The Psychology Book from Big Ideas. More recently, she trained in counselling and psychotherapy, and her latest book, What Would Freud Do, has been translated into 11 languages. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. Available from Trapart Books, 2019. Please visit our publisher's website, www.trapart.net. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode.
Thank you for inviting me on. I'm involved in it's a startup publishing company, and we are producing books that the aim is to introduce the ideas of really the world's greatest thinkers in a genuinely accessible way. And there are kind of two things behind this. One is that my partner, Alice Bowden, and I were... to be honest, we were very often finding ourselves embarrassed when in a conversation or reading the paper, when someone would mention a big name and one of us would be thinking, like, who the hell is, Karl Marx, I probably got a slight handle on, but there are certainly big names where these names crop up. And I think it's kind of awkward for people to kind of admit maybe that, like, we don't know who they are and what they did.
Well, not so even if you do know their name or know a bit about them. I mean, we can't all read and study in depth everybody and everything, So it's really nice to have kind of primers or things to like bring you up to date on like all of their biggest ideas and I love that you include their history in with it and how that ties in.
Yeah, that was really important to me because the more Alice and I talked about it, really that it became very important to me to kind of investigate where ideas come from, because ideas don't exist in a vacuum. They're going to come up as a kind of result of both the sort of zeitgeist, so the culture in which somebody has been born into and is surrounded by, as well as the people in their field when they finally go on to kind of study at university, but also the person's actual life. That, of course, from my studies in psychotherapy, it's very obvious that what we think about and the way we think about things and the things that really fascinate us are going to have a lot to do with who we are and what has happened in our lives. So it seemed to me that, these great ideas that they came up with, they kind of make more sense when you embed them into the person's life and into the world in which they were living. So whether it was the 17th century France or 20th century America, that really, really made a difference to what kind of things they were thinking about and where their ideas where their minds were flying, actually.
Yeah, and that's often something you don't even get in academia, is like someone's kind of biography.
Yeah. And we have kind of really encouraged our authors because many of them were kind of more at ease with talking about the ideas. So we had to really kind of convince them, like, no, we really, really genuinely wanted to know, like, who the hell is, Stanley Milgram, Nietzsche, all these people, like, who was the person? What happened to them? What was their life like? What was that world like? Because I think it really does genuinely help in understanding the ideas, as well as, everybody likes a story. It's good to start with the story. So the story of their lives and the world they're in, and the kind of intellectuals that were buzzing around them at the time, which is also kind of fascinating to get that intellectual context.
Right, and it situates them in history instead of them just being these like names that are just like kind of floating around in this, pool of ideas that we have. And
yeah, where they seem to be, like, as you say, absolutely kind of that they're weirdly free floating. And of course, that's not the case. Like, they weren't at all. Because, our book on Melanie Klein, obviously Klein wouldn't be here without Freud and the rest of the psychoanalytic community that was kind of already up and running. There's a kind of, and also then her own life is also kind of figuring in there. It's just, I don't know, I guess maybe I'm saying I find it really fascinating to learn about the person themselves, as well as the kind of almost drier actual concepts that were so hugely influential.
No, I do too, and I think it really sets this series apart. And like I said, when I discovered this, I jumped right on it. I was like, this is an amazing idea and such a great project.
Great, that's very kind. Thank you. Yeah.
I also love that you just say who the hell is, and you don't put like little asterisks or stars, or you don't like cut it out. You just say who the hell is.
Yeah, that did feel kind of risky, but I think it's because we wanted to reflect the actual thought that we both had of when somebody is talking about, somebody like Klein or Nietzsche or someone that the actual thought that would run through my mind is, who the hell is Nietzsche? Who the hell is? And it was like, well, let's just answer that question as fully as we can.
Yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah. So it's a lot of fun to put together. Yeah.
Have you chosen who to do first?
Well, actually, we kind of cheated to begin with because, Alice, my partner, is an art historian. So she really wanted to write a book on somebody called Erwin Panofsky, an art critic. He was kind of one of the seminal figures in art history. And I have to admit, actually, that, even I've got a degree in psychotherapy and a degree in philosophy. And when I looked at Panofsky's own work, I found it way too complex to understand. So although I'm not an art historian, I just said to Alice, yes, I think the world does need this guy's ideas translating into some kind of an accessible form so that we can actually grasp, because I could see that he was really important, but some of these people write in such an intricate way in their own words that it is very, very hard to grasp, especially given that we're not living in the same context and time as them. So there's a kind of not an updating, but a kind of clarifying for readers today of language that may have been more accessible 100 years ago, 200 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you have Melanie Klein.
Yes, we love Melanie Klein. Yes, and we're planning, lots of other books on psychology. We've got a great one coming up on Stanley Milgram. I think that'll be really fun. In fact, Stanley Milgram has been a favorite of mine since I, a very long time ago, watched a film of him giving a lecture where he was walking around a city talking about psychology. And in the middle of this lecture, he sits down at a kind of cafe bar. And this film is from the 70s. And as he's still lecturing to camera, a waiter comes out and says, "Would you like a drink?" And he says, "I'll have a dry martini." And then he just carries on chatting and lecturing while then drinking a dry martini, which I thought was absolutely fabulous. So I don't know if we'll get that in the book because it's fairly kind of, not exactly an essential bit of knowledge, but I do like Milgram a lot.
But there's fun idiosyncrasies.
Yeah. And also because, he was writing about authority. He was writing about the way that we are so incredibly susceptible to being ordered to do something by figures who are in authority or look as though they're in authority. And yet he was clearly not one to kind of stick to the rules at all. So there's probably something in there, and I can't tell you yet because we haven't. The author is still writing that one, but I think I'm really looking forward to that one. That'll be really fascinating. Then there's within psychology we also have one coming up on Piaget and Bf Skinner, and then we basically are looking at producing books at the moment across 5 disciplines. So psychology, philosophy, art history, sociology, and politics. And we did originally have feminism as a standalone topic. And then we had a series of conversations, Alice and I, but also with some of our authors. And actually it occurred to us that really feminism is part of politics. That perhaps it was time to recognize that feminism is, it's a political movement. Mm-hmm. So famous feminists shouldn't be in this kind of standalone, almost strange thing just called feminism, but actually they should just be in the politics list because that is where they deserve to be. So the feminists we have books planned on will all be appearing in our politics list.
Wonderful. Integrated,
but also really kind of recognized as being political. That it's not some kind of bizarre women's studies thing off on its own, which I just think that's kind of been a way possibly of sidelining them and sidelining their importance. And I think when you put them within the political arena, alongside, the great civil rights, the people who fought for that, all those kinds of things that, they should all be in politics. Mm-hmm. So that became quite important, actually.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
I think you mentioned the word integration earlier, and I was thinking, for us, we're integrating very many things. We're interested in kind of the crossovers between disciplines. So Olympe de Gouges is an 18th century playwright who was also a fierce political activist who was put to death in the French Revolution. And it's kind of anything to do with crossovers and integration. So I guess really the kind of the reasons that I got particularly interested in this, I guess, is that because I have studied philosophy and psychotherapy, but I also worked in publishing for about 25 years and worked on some really great reference books. Like, I don't know if you know, DK did a series of books called the Big Ideas books.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I worked on the first sort of 4 or 5 of those. So I was one of the main editors on the philosophy book and then the psychology book. And actually that was the first time that it struck me that in those books we did little biographies on the people that were being written about, sort of alongside some of the things they talked about. And it just struck me over and over again how many of the philosophers had spent a long time ill in bed as children in a time where there was obviously no TV or internet. And so they had had nothing to do except think. So some of these great thinkers in philosophy did have to spend an awful lot of time just thinking as kids. And I just found that really striking at the time. And then likewise, in the psychology book, I was kind of reading these kind of mini biographies all the time where a lot of these really kind of seminal psychologists had kind of ended up really studying something that had been, and it's like, it's not a surprise perhaps, but things that had really been important within their own lives. So kind of, I guess, one of the most famous ones is Erickson, who, as you know, is like a great expert on identity. And it came about because his own identity was completely kind of in question. That he never knew who his father was. He was given the surname, the last name of the man who was his mother's husband when he was born, or just after he was born. But then his mother got divorced and married another man when he was 3. So Erickson had he had a father that he had no information on at all. He carried the last name of a man who left his life when he was 3. And he felt all his life that he didn't really know who he was. And then as he grew up, he suffered what he ended up calling an aggravated identity crisis. But identity crisis was his own term. Like, this was not really something anyone had studied before. And then actually almost, I don't know, is it by chance? Maybe nothing is by chance. But he ended up teaching art in a school that was run on psychoanalytic principles. And that kind of, there he got intrigued with all of that. And then he became a psychoanalyst. And then he produced, amazing work on identity. So yeah, again, it's the kind of incidence of somebody's fascination with something that's really personal to them becoming a kind of area in which their mind kind of goes swimming at great depth and then produces these really incredible kind of ideas.
That's brilliant. I didn't know that about Erickson.
Yeah, I know, isn't it interesting?
It makes perfect sense, yeah.
Yeah. Another one is the French analyst Boris Cyrulnik, and I hope French people will forgive my bad pronunciation there, because that's clearly not right. But he was born in 1937 and his parents were Jewish, and he was born just before the Second World War. And then when Germany came and started to take control of parts of France, his parents were terrified about what would happen, and they gave him into the care of foster parents. As it turned out, just before they were arrested and taken to Auschwitz, where they died. So they thought that they had at least had him safe, but in fact his foster parents ended up giving him, sort of handing him over to the German authorities in return for money. And somehow he managed to escape, and he hid by working on farms, and he somehow managed to stay alive. And he ended up being an absolute expert on resilience and trauma. So yeah, this is kind of what we're seeing crop up over and over again, that it is something in their lives that really leads them to do this kind of really kind of sort of deep dive into something. And it's the deep dive that is essential for bringing out something new, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you are a psychoanalyst or psychotherapist, you see how these ideas and dynamics are at play in people's lives in whatever kind of profession they end up in. So it's really interesting to think about it when the profession is specifically about the mind or consciousness or thought or those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And the other thing that it brings to mind is, so Rendering Unconscious is also a book, and in the introduction of the book that I edited together, I talk about that because I think it's something that's not talked about in psychoanalysis and psychology in general enough, is like how many psychoanalysts were persecuted during World War II, and how many people, how many people died or committed suicide or practiced in secret during that time.
Yeah. And then the great flight of all those intellectuals to America, which brought up all those kind of great cultural theorists as well. Adorno and the kind of Frankfurt School. There was a lot of that flight. And of course, then psychoanalysis is all about didn't Freud refer to it as a kind of archaeology, that it's all about everything that's hidden and buried and lost. Yeah. And how does that, and in what ways is that going to work its way to the surface?
Exactly.
And it's going to be in so many ways. Yeah, some of them helpful, some of them not so helpful to the person. But yeah, it is, yeah, as you say, it's always going to be there. It's always going to be generating an energy down in the unconscious. And
exactly.
And you've got that energy. That's the kind of, I know Freud didn't he didn't include that as a drive, but just now I'm thinking, wow, that really is a drive. Actually, some of those are creating a kind of real drive into certain places from the sort of the built-up energy in the unconscious around certain things. It's kind of it is going to seek expression.
Exactly, the return of the repressed.
Yeah. But even sort of things that you don't know you're repressing, and I know that's kind of part of repression. But yeah, one of the strange things is that I think sometimes or maybe this is just me, who knows, thinks that the return of the repressed is that we kind of know what we've repressed, but actually we don't. That's why it's so bizarre when it comes up. And maybe that's why all these people have only been presented as kind of having these very clean ideas that came from nowhere. I don't know. Because these connections are not generally made between the ideas and the life. So it has always looked like they were just like chance, or
or they were just like studying other people's ideas, but like in this sort of vacuum of tunnel of ideas.
Yeah, which the more as you say that, I'm thinking, yeah, that's crazy that we ever even bought that. It just seems kind of mad to me to think that now.
It seems like a cultural amnesia of sorts. Like the whole culture has repressed certain aspects of the culture and everything that goes along with it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's something about I don't know whether this is something to do with that rise of rationality from the kind of Enlightenment onwards, that somehow these ideas have to be kind of rational, clean, clear, not to be seen in any way tainted by emotion or subjectivity, maybe. That in order for them to kind of be accepted as big ideas, the people themselves had to kind of almost stand well back from them, as though there is no personal engagement.
Yeah, that's a really good point. They have to be like objective truths and not something stemming from someone's childhood trauma.
Yeah. That might have kind of muddied the ideas in some way, and that rendering them sort of less acceptable, I guess. Maybe, I don't know. We're conjecturing now, but
yeah.
but it's interesting. It's I can see that as a kind of possibility of the great fight that there has always been between objectivity and rationalism on the one hand, and subjectivity and some kind of allowance for emotions on the other. That's definitely an old fight. And I think we still kind of see that today, whether it's in psychology or anything else. This need for, or this apparent need for objectivity, and everything else is kind of worthless. I don't know.
Yeah, and hopefully I think that's starting to erode now. People are getting more into the ideas of like truths being part of subjectivity, or being resonant between subjectivities. And
yeah, do you think? I hope so.
I hope so.
Well, it allows flexibility, doesn't it? It does. That does seem to signify a move away from rigidity. I think that if we are allowed to begin to see that, gosh, like actually the really ancient Greek philosophers said that that truth is, the idea of truth is that it's all subjective, that it really does depend on your perspective. What's hot to one person is not hot to another. everything is, the idea of different perspectives. And I'm just thinking as we're talking here, this kind of ties in with identity politics and the other thing that feels like such a big switch at the moment, which is to begin to take away the absolute kind of primacy of the kind of white Western view of the world and of history, and to begin to really allow some of the other voices to be heard at last. And then the kind of the revision of how we have seen the history of the world so far, as it starts to be able to hear something from all the different voices that have always been written out of history. That it is extraordinary, and it's so enriching. It's kind of exciting times, I think, because I think we are beginning to hear from just a much wider range of voices. And that's one thing that's a little bit depressing sometimes about working, well, especially looking at the kind of the big thing, or the big thinkers who have so far been acknowledged within philosophy and psychology, is that we've really only heard from the kind of white Westerners. We've not really heard so much from other people. So I'm really hopeful that these fields and all the fields will begin to get far more interesting as it kind of opens up to bring in new perspectives and voices, and all the richness that comes with that.
Absolutely. What brought you into the fields of psychology and philosophy in the first place? Like, how did your interest start?
Well, of course, classically, with my own life. So I was brought up in an extremely dysfunctional family with a father who was alcoholic and then psychotic for about 5 years before he died. And I was only 11 when he died. So I was kind of brought up in a house where almost reality itself was up for question, because my father was hallucinating horrible things all over the place. So to be this young child growing up with that, and not quite like, when somebody's saying this is over there and you can't see it, it's kind of challenging in terms of knowing what's reality and what's not.
It's confusing.
Very confusing, very confusing. So I think I just set off on a course of like, I need to get more knowledge, and I need to get it from outside sources. So I was always an avid book reader, and books have played a huge part in my life. So it's not surprising to me actually that I worked in publishing for 25 years. It's kind of they're almost a talisman for me, I think. So I first went to philosophy to see if I could find out about the mind, about the human mind. How does it work? What's going on up there? What's real? What's not? I mean, philosophy, it puts up all the greatest questions and the biggest questions of all, really. Though I do clearly remember the philosophy lecturer asking me, or warning me, really, in my interview to go to universities. He said, I hope you're not expecting answers to all the big questions. That if you study philosophy, it will throw up the biggest questions, and then we'll talk about them, but there aren't any answers. Which was kind of disappointing and intriguing at the same time. So I love studying philosophy, and then I worked in publishing, so I kind of went back to the kind of back in love with the books. And so then it wasn't, but then I also did have, throughout my life, over the last sort of 30 years or so, I've had quite a lot of therapy on and off in different forms. And then in about 2010, 11, I decided to give that sort of full-time attention and really kind of dive into psychotherapy in the way that I had into philosophy, as a kind of different way of trying to find out how the mind works, what's real, what's normal. They kind of go around the same arena in the same way, in a different way, those disciplines. In terms of, so we're back to kind of truth again, as you were talking about earlier, the different kinds of truth. But here are different ways of approaching some of those same kind of conundrums. And then I was lucky enough 3 years ago to be commissioned to write a book. And it's called What Would Freud Do?
That's the best title.
Well, that's also part of a series, actually, but that was the first one. And so somebody that I'd known through publishing, and he knew that I'd studied psychotherapy, and he said that he wanted to do a book that was based on kind of agony aunt style, kind of magazine type questions or problems, and then to write answers to the problems as though by a psychotherapist, not necessarily Freud, but a psychotherapist. And so I thought that was kind of a challenge, because I said psychotherapists don't really give answers. To which my great friend Trevor said, he said, Sarah, do you want the money or not? And I went, okay, I'll figure it out. So actually it was really fun, because I had to come up with 40 questions, which were kind of fairly carefully thought out, so that each one would kind of fairly naturally lead me to talk about the work of a particular psychotherapist or psychologist and how they might approach that problem. And then also to kind of, in most of them, to say, but what would Freud have said? So I was kind of musing and putting on my Freud thinking cap of what Freud might have made of it. And so that was it was really fun to write, because it did bring in my love of psychotherapy and my love of publishing. So that was a really fun book to write. And and it's sold really well around the world. I think it's in 11, maybe 12 languages. There are more books and publishing in me than meets the eye. Because you're very kind to inviting me on to talk about the Who the Hell Is series, but yeah, books are hugely important to me. Yeah, personally and professionally. So they've been a lifesaver for me. I mean, I think I am really genuinely attached to them as part of my own survival, to be honest. So I'm actually deeply grateful to some of these people who have thought about all of these things across all these disciplines so deeply, because at various times those ideas have been, life-saving to me, and really grounding. And obviously along with lots of kind of just fantastic fiction as well. I'm not ever going to lose the writers that I love in fiction, but so I think I am kind of genuinely committed to books in a quite extraordinary way, I guess.
Absolutely. And now you're creating a series of books to be able to share these ideas with a larger audience, so you can reach more people.
Yeah. And in a way where these ideas are, you can kind of have that aha moment where you really get it, so that they're not kind of dry bones ideas that are kind of just brushed over, but where you kind of really genuinely grasp something. It's kind of a strange distinction, but I'm hoping you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
So read about it, that you actually kind of grasp it, that in some way your mind does something quite difficult. It's like different. It's like the mind really genuinely picks something up suddenly and goes, I can do something with this. This is really genuinely interesting. This is like good stuff in some way.
Yeah, exactly. It really has an impact, instead of, a lot of times, sometimes when I read, I won't name particular philosophers or academics, but sometimes when I read some books that, I understand and I enjoy the gist of what they're saying, but it's like they could have said the same thing in like a quarter of the pages. And I feel like they just make things overly complicated for not really any reason except for maybe to impress other people or impress their colleagues, or to be able to fill their quota of publishing they need to fill. But the idea is I really appreciate when ideas actually come forward in a straightforward manner, Yeah,
and then you're absolutely right that actually all the time that I was commissioning reference books, there that was very often the problem, was that I was always saying to people, like, write it so we can really understand what you're talking about. But the kind of desire to show off, it did very often totally get in the way, because, there's something there about the author needing it to be about them. And I'd be saying, no, it's not about you. It's about, Marx or whoever. It's about that person. It's not about you. But that darn ego is getting in the way all the time. Yeah. And so I think that is really, in my experience, that has been a problem with commissioning these books, is that the author's ego does tempt them into a kind of, into writing actually as obliquely as possible, as a way of kind of looking more clever. Right. And I'm like, I don't want you to be clever. I want the cleverness here has to go into really making it as simple as possible. It's kind of like the very clean, simple lines of Picasso. I don't want a great fussy thing. I want it as clean and simple as possible. And that is surprisingly hard for authors to understand.
No, it is. It's like we know you're clever. That's why we're asking you to do the book.
Yeah. But I think there's a kind of confusion on their part, that they think if they write it in very simple, plain English, that it will make them look dumber than if they write in kind of words with as many syllables as possible. And I don't think that's true at all. But I think people, a lot of authors do believe that.
Especially if they're coming from academia, because I know, I trained as a psychoanalyst in New York, and I got really frustrated with the field, not because there's so many amazing ideas, and I felt like every time I'd go to a conference or a study group or a talk or whatever, it was always like the same. I mean, it was New York, so we had a lot of people, it was like 40 people, but like it was always the same people. And I was like, these are great ideas, and like we're talking to each other at this very small group for years and years on end, and I was like, I want to go get these ideas out to other people so that other people can have these like aha moments, like you said, or be impacted by them, and then like take them forward in their own way. And how do I do that? And so I started giving more talks about the arts and that sort of thing that would like reach an audience outside of the psychoanalytic community. But then when I go back and I give a talk now to like a psychoanalytic institute or philosophy department at a university or something, I find that because I do speak so clearly, I do get kind of looks of like, like it's like confused in the opposite way. It's like, why is she speaking so clearly?
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. So do you feel like, they kind of, they don't want you to do that, clearly.
Yeah, what's wrong with her? I'm like, and I always have to find myself explaining, well, I try to say these things in ways that, don't use jargon, because some of you might not have read Lacan, so like I'm trying not to use Lacan's jargon, but still trying to explain his ideas,
Yeah. You're naming one of the most complicated people ever there. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm kind of wondering what that's about, actually, because it actually does. It acts to lock certain groups of people out of the conversation. Yeah. And I do really think at the moment, I do think there is a kind of there does seem some excitement around learning at the moment. And I think, like the TED Talks, which are incredibly accessible, but this need to sort of keep it complicated does feel, I don't know, is that conscious or unconscious? It does feel like it's a deliberate attempt to keep it within an elite, to keep other people locked out of that conversation.
Yeah, I think so, and maybe to keep their position, like we're up here.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're not going to help you understand, which is kind of curious in something like psychoanalysis, which is, I'm hoping that with a kind of aim of helping people, of being useful. So it's even stranger then, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah, to me, absolutely. It really confused me. I was like, isn't that kind of the whole point of this field, is to like help other people understand themselves and like feel better and not feel so neurotic or like they're shooting themselves in the foot all the time. So if we can like translate some of these ideas in a way that more people can understand, isn't that what we should want to do?
And they're clearly telling you no. Yeah, you were kind of a traitor in some way. That they wanted to kind of. It feels like they did want to sort of shoehorn you back into that kind of deliberate complexity.
Yeah, and then they'll say like, "Oh, you're like a pop psychologist," stuff like that. But on the other hand, like Zizek, for whatever anybody thinks about Zizek, like he took these ideas and he talked about them in the political arena, in film theory, in society, in things that people are experiencing. And everyone I talk to that's like under the age of 30, they've all come through psychoanalysis through Zizek. So like, bravo,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is interesting. And he is also speaking with a lot of passion.
Yeah.
So here we've got that thing about emotion again, that he's kind of allowing subjectivity and emotion, and that is what's gripping people.
Exactly. I'm sure it's affected by his personal history and where he's from and the times he's formed in, and then also relating it to like larger popular culture and film and society and politics that other people are experiencing.
Yeah. So there's something about the kind of I'm one of you, whatever, I'm one of us, maybe that there isn't a need to kind of to make himself superior.
Yeah, and it's situated in our current times and in history, like you were saying, like more integrated.
Yeah. Yeah, nice, very nice.
Interesting.
So maybe psychoanalysis, I don't know. Maybe is it changing? I don't know. Does it feel like it's shifting towards that direction?
I hope so. I mean, I'm definitely trying to help it do that. We started this group in New York called the Das Unbehagen, from Das Unbehagen in der Culture, the civilization and its discontents. So we were the discontent. So it was a bunch of us who had gone through psychoanalytic training and were really frustrated with like, it was just so old and dead, and they just wanted to edit everything we had to say, and it had to be, they're talking about psychoanalysis and neurology, like neuropsychoanalysis, and trying to like mend the dynamics between psychoanalysis and biology and medical science. And it was just like, that's fine if people want to do that, but like I don't think we should all have to do that. There's a lot of other aspects of psychoanalysis that I would like to think about besides trying to do that, or like validate it through science, through medical science. So we're just like so frustrated.
Yeah. Is it Mark Soames?
Mark Soames does that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's great if that's what he wants to do.
I've seen him talk, actually. I went to a great, and I can't remember who the other person was. I went to a whole day-long debate at the Psychoanalytic Centre at the University of Essex last year, on where Mark Soames came, and he was debating with a very old school psychoanalyst who said there was no need for this neuroscience kind of input, and the two of them were debating whether that was true or not, and both were quite heated, and it was kind of an interesting argument, because one was kind of Mark Soames was like, we need, again, we're back to this kind of evidence-based objective. He was like, we need to put psychoanalysis onto that kind of foundation. And I wish I could remember the name of the other analyst who was saying, no, we don't need that at all. We're all about sitting with the not knowing. We're about reverie. It's about letting a knowledge kind of come up. It's a kind of far more subtle thing, really. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they didn't, obviously I guess they were never going to reach agreement, but it was really fascinating to sort of see them really argue it out all day. And yeah, that was an interesting, yeah. So that's quite a big kind of topic in psychoanalysis today, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate, but I wish that they could coexist. If some people want to study it in neuroscientifically, that's fine, but they shouldn't put it on everyone else to say that that's the only way, or that's the only way to find truth, or that's the only way to validate psychoanalysis. I think that all the different, but it's also the same thing. Like when I went to graduate school for psychology, I thought that everybody understood that like Skinner had a point and Pavlov had a point and Freud had a point and Jung had a point, and that all these ideas like are interesting ideas in their own way and might fit different people at different times in their lives. But then when you get to school and they're teaching you this, it's like one is right and the others are wrong. It's like you have to choose a side or a position, and I just think that's so antithetical to everything that psychoanalysis is about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking that I was really struck for kind of a few years before I wrote the What Would Freud Do is this other big fight that goes on between the psychologists and the psychotherapists / analysts. Mm-hmm. That the psychologists, I was like, why do they seem to hate each other so much? And it was because the psychologists really wanted their field of study to be recognized as a science, and the psychotherapists were really interested more in humanities. And so someone explained it to me once by saying that the psychologists don't like the analysts and the therapists because they say that they don't know. Yeah, it's based on nothing. And the therapists and analysts don't like the psychologists because they say nothing they're doing has anything to do with people. And apparently that argument goes right back to the beginning of psychology as a discipline, where the kind of two first people to kind of pick it up very seriously were Wilhelm Wundt in his laboratory in Germany, who started running some really extraordinary experiments as a way to find out more about the human mind. And then on the other hand, there was William James in America, who was studying his own mind very subjectively, really trying to work out what was going on in it. And so that was kind of the split from the start, that there was a kind of laboratory-based scientific number crunching element. And then on a completely different path was this much more subjective approach to the human mind and what is going on in there in a much kind of, actually, I'd have to say, in a kind of Ian McGilchrist way, that's a much more right brain way to go at it. So, yeah, one half is doing that kind of much larger, broader picture right brain take on it, and the other one is trying to narrow things down to the narrowest possible point, actually, and literally pin it down like a kind of butterfly in one of those old framed pictures.
It's a great way to put it.
Yeah. Do you know Ian McGilchrist's stuff?
No.
Well, he has this graph. I'm not going to get into it. The kind of short way of understanding. He wrote a massive, I think it's about 800-page book on his study of the brain. And then, thankfully for most of us who didn't manage to get all the way through it, a few years ago he printed a 20-page book with just the main points. Thank you so much for doing that. But he kind of, what he says is that all mammals and birds, actually, that this thing that the brain has the kind of two parts and the corpus callosum running between them, and it's always there, and it's been there forever, so that there's a reason for it in evolutionary terms. And he says the easiest way to understand how the two parts of the brain work is that imagine you're a crow, that the crow has to be able to see a worm, like one tiny worm on the ground below it, so it can dive down and grab it to eat it. And that's what the left brain does. It really refines things down to these tiny, tiny, clear details. But also it has to be, the crow at the same time has to have an overall awareness of the entire world around it, so that it knows if there's a predator coming at it from above or behind. So you've got one part of your brain is scanning the kind of whole big picture all the time, and one part is just trying to narrow something down to a tiny detail and also grab it. So the left brain is doing this kind of grabbing of information or grabbing of worms or whatever it is. And I was thinking, that does kind of sound similar to this split between psychology and psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. the one is doing this much more kind of big picture kind of environmental sort of scanning, taking everything in. And the other one is just interested in one tiny thing.
Yeah, pinning it down. And it reminds me of like CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. It's like, sure, when I'm having a bad day or something, changing my thoughts and like consciously taking a moment and taking some deep breaths and like reframing the way I'm thinking about something can help. Does it solve all my problems? No, but it's a useful tool. And that's why I don't, because even psychoanalysts that I know would like never give a patient that kind of tool, but like I don't have a problem doing that. If I could see that it could help someone like keep out of a panic attack spiral, then like why shouldn't I help them with that? And then go back to the usual talk therapy.
Yeah. And it's that flexibility again versus rigidity, isn't it? It's remaining open to whatever comes up, and also open to whatever kind of solution might be kind of feeling like that's the one to reach for at that point. And when to go for the tool and when to sit with the not knowing.
Right.
That there's always going to be that kind of I don't know, instinct, judgment. I'm not sure what's coming into play there, but certainly that those two things are always going to be kind of side by side in a judgment with somebody, in sitting with somebody and working out what would be the most useful way to be with them that day in that hour. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, is there anything that we didn't get to that you want to make sure we talk about? This is such a fun conversation.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's been you've taken our minds into the really quite fascinating kind of quarters there. That's lovely.
What are you working on now?
Well, I see clients as a psychotherapist, and I kind of split my week between doing that and commissioning and editing the books for the Who the Hell Is series. So I'm working on Marx, which is why he probably keeps coming up today, because I've had him in my head all day. A book on Karl Marx, Who the Hell is Karl Marx, and the great philosopher David Hume, Who the Hell is David Hume? So I'm kind of bouncing between those two great minds, actually.
Wonderful.
And then interspersing that, half the week doing that and half the week doing the psychotherapy. So it's all about minds. And being with people in maybe in different ways. I am sort of spending time with Karl Marx and David Hume in some way when I'm working on their books, and maybe that's because even as a child I was just kind of entering those worlds. But so some of the week I'm being with my clients, and some of the week I'm being with these other extraordinary people who are kind of still around, whose presence is still felt in the world, actually.
Absolutely.
So an interesting life.
Yeah, it's been nice since I've moved from New York to Sweden. I have a lot less patients, and I was used to working full time with patients, and I loved it. It was very rewarding, but now I'm finding I have more time for reading and writing and the podcast and things like that. So it's nice to have this kind of bouquet of different avenues of working within the field.
Yeah, I love the idea of the bouquet. That's wonderful. Yeah, and your podcast is a kind of bouquet, isn't it? So it is, and it smells lovely.
Yeah, it's been really fun, and it's. I'm sure you feel the same way. But when you speak with patients, you learn so much from them, and seeing all these different perspectives and worldviews. So it's kind of another way I've been able to like see all these different worldviews and perspectives, and all these different things people are working on through talking to them with these interviews. Yeah,
and their minds are, to me, just as wonderful as some of these people that we're writing the books about.
Exactly.
Absolutely, that every single kind of individual mind, every person, it is a real privilege to be able to sit with them in that kind of way, and get to know them. Amazing.
Thank you for listening to Rendering Unconscious. You've just heard a discussion with Sarah Tomley, co-founder and editor of the Who the Hell Is book series with Alice Bowden. For more information, please visit their website, whothehellis.co.uk. For more information, you can visit my website, drvanessasinclair.net, or the podcast website, renderingunconscious.org. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. Available from Trapart Books, 2019. Please visit our publisher's website, www.trapart.net. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. The curious collaboration between and his wife should also be mentioned. Chains, subject to extremely. This is an under whiskey ads, I notice. Science, reverence, this space is wish to live. It's just stuff. Sophisticated entertainment. Psychoanalytic, and that was your blocks actually form these words. Maggots, we want to live. Separation based on, and we all presence of, the complex. Interviewer, do you think such experiments were rare in the West, and have remained the best of places? I dressing up the view, my love sores. Thank you for little censorship and so. One of the most successful was, undoubtedly, the collaboration of my emotions, and as possible, of birth in archetype of R, especially the group of these tiny between. And when both signed dimensional students is, as such, has a feminine and links with their names to romance and the inheritors. At the beginning of we is made, and that where the airwaves. Letter finds lives. We attract in noting thee beyond thee. Help you understand role, to relearn of doing things, commune, sexuality. We're the publication of each of pleasure and unpleasure, to the is merely or you, for as they aside eventually, we can and will. Oyster good, so colored decision he makes, corresponding little treaties. Comment present in the mind, but is no ignorant, human, sense, imprint, in mind, with her wedding dress. What part of co-hosting the show relate them in such a manner, merely acting, and our consciousness is that will that develop and think. I think back and from ancestors, but to break as his own by them, reinterpreted by the hate for us to superimpose. Old-fashioned candy of hope, what will happen mingly, everything come together, blue, aimed at a collective creation with the exquisite corpses, dream states, not processes. We try to estimate, ask a question, such as, and then when I'm Skyping, party game that led to such publications as Sleep, conscious to the topographical course has been. The coconut, leave the nut, have to be ink. There's glowing ally, challenging trade for an eclectic range of ever not domain. With discipline, definitions that be, giving the most co-explored these. Writing, right. Scientists are already at large. Continually an artist-in-residence model, with the publication of soundnesses, and at present conceives the whole line emerging for new growth. Number of variations in mighty judge particles through radioactive sexuality. More old that shift, impure, every, who never grows. That's what I've already done. Scientists, I hope, will continue to do for their own right. Eroticize, rockabilly, it following different. Anybody, it could be any body, situations and circumstances, striking various notes, community to painting of, and how to write. Already the ancestors of the century, in the same spirit established, be it in varying but concurrent, joined in writing a travel book, journey to a war, be it in the end of matter.